Generative AI, the limit is the sky. Write a book with a great hook, with AI's brain go. I can write anything. ChatGPT, it's you and me, with AI's brain flow. AI's brain flow.
Welcome to Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast, where we explore the intersection of AI and creativity with your hosts, Rob and Jason.
Welcome back to yet another episode of Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jason Moore, along with my pal, Rob Lauder. And we have got a pretty fun episode for you today. We talk about how to write a book using AI tools. And this can be anything from a short children's book to a thesis on AI in the church. It's 260 pages. AI can help you bring your dream of being an author to life, and we're going to tell you how to do it today. What's happening, Rob?
Yeah, and we're going to cover that whole creative process of not having AI write your book for you, but going through how to outline, build out, refine, edit, publish your project, start to finish. And you are a master of this because you've done it. So I'm excited to figure out how to do this myself.
And you've done it on a smaller scale as well. We're going to hit some of those kind of misnomers and misconceptions about how to write a book. The joke I get all the time was, you just had AI write your book for you, right? It's not as easy as just hitting a button and getting a book. And so we're going to cover that. We're going to skim generating everything from the cover, maybe even talk a little bit about how you can put together the innards of the book, how you might put together a book trailer, how you might advertise the book. Those are going to be fun things to talk about.
Yeah. So whether you are like coming at this as a seasoned writer, Jason, you've written 432 books at this point, or if you're exploring your first creative project as a aspiring author, we're going to get into all sorts of insights to help you transform that storytelling process. But man, let's kind of catch up. It's been a while since we last recorded.
I actually, just a few weeks ago, had a conversation with my publisher about my next book. And we were talking about how we might use AI to not only create a book, but to create some resource guides that the content that I'm going to create can be split up and used in a sense for other folks. So I'm going to probably write about hospitality and so on. How about you? What have you been up to?
Cool. Yeah. So this episode is near and dear to my heart because you mentioned that I've done this before too, not nearly at the scale that you have, but one of my first experiments with ChatGPT was to write a children's book. And I kind of went about how can I use this technology as a, ghostwriter, creative partner, soundboard, etc. And so at that point, we were using GPT 3.5 and even cranking out 1,500 words of good original content that matches the vision is hard because these models are trained to respond a certain way. And then I repeat that experiment with every new generation of models that comes out because it's kind of like one of my benchmarks, like how is this thing going to perform for this type of task? And I'll say that, GPT 4.5 just dropped a couple of weeks ago, and it's really intriguing, I think, for writing and creating content that breaks out of that robotic AI framework. A lot of people have misunderstood GPT 4.5. They wanted to be GPT 5 or whatever that's going to be. But when OpenAI released it, they were really talking about how this is a high EQ model. It's not like the other models. And I think that's true. So something to explore as we go through this process.
Let's get into writing a book with AI. I think it's best to start at the beginning of the process. Rob, where do we start when we want to write a book using AI?
When I've approached writing projects in the past, whether it's Max and Teddy or anything else, generally you're coming at it with a concept, at least an idea of what you want to write. But I think that one of the first challenges is really kind of coming up with the hook, the engaging idea, like narrowing a concept from I have an idea to I have an idea for a book that I can actually act on and begin a project to write. And so I think that AI tools like ChatGPT are really good creative partners in the process, kind of in that brainstorming phase. Like any creative project that I start, a lot of times I'll go to ChatGPT and I'll say, I want to work on this sort of project. This is the thing that I want to create. Help me just come up with 5 angles on it. And in fact, one of the episodes that we've got coming up, I had an idea for the episode and I said, hey, ChatGPT, got an episode that I want to do on this. Help me come up with some angles. And just that starts to get creative juices flowing to start to get those themes and even kind of some creative scenarios there. If you're writing nonfiction, ChatGPT can kind of produce some premises or plot lines that you might not have thought of. It can help you do some of the outlining process, all on demand as a creative partner. As we're going to explore, obviously, you still have to be the human in the loop because a lot of the things are going to be very generic and they're not going to be terribly creative. But the idea is that it can spark those story ideas that you might not have had to begin with, and then be a starting point for you to start developing those, looking at characters and genre and all those other things and getting past that initial writer's block.
I love how you characterize the partnership, though. It is that you're partnering with it. It's a creative partnership, in a sense, with the AI that you're working with. And I think too many people think it's just to give it a command and get a thing, and it doesn't really work like that. I have a friend who is a Hollywood writer, and a few years ago, I was speaking at a conference and got to lead a panel with a bunch of my Hollywood writer friends. And one of the things they all talked about was that the blank page is the hardest thing to deal with when you're a creative writer. One of the things I love about using ChatGPT or Claude or any of the chatbots that we regularly use is that it eliminates that problem. You can give it, as you said, these prompts that would give you a starting point, which is pretty great. And I know, Rob, when you and I have collaborated, you've kind of walked me through using it for those prompts and scenarios. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you're using it as a starting point with those prompts.
Yeah, when you say prompts, I get a little triggered because when it comes to AI prompts, I am very anti-prompt. But
I know.
What we're talking about here is we're talking about...
writing prompts.
Having the AI prompt me to write something. So that's a plot twist. You can give just a general question for AI to get that creative flow going. Anytime I start a video project or anything like that I don't have a solid concept for, I'll just be like, give me some angles and let me think about those. And a lot of times I'll mix and match and take some from one suggestion and some from another. Inevitably, there's something in there that I hadn't thought about myself, and that helps me get moving. Then you take that, you use it as a springboard, take bits of one concept, mix it with another concept, flesh out a final direction. And that's, I think, one of the unique use cases of AI, that we're not entirely relying on the model to come up with that concept for us. We're helping it come up with some of the builder's blocks that we can use then to overcome writer's block and get those paragraphs of creative material flowing out of it and get that start.
One of the things I really like about it, and where I recommend that people use it, is to help you work out story problems. I just did this experiment writing a little 1980s sci-fi piece, but it involved some time travel. It helped me work out the ages of the characters at various times in the story. You can use it to keep things straight, and it will help you to tell a story non-linearly if you decide to go back and tell it out of order. It'll even create things like visual tables to help you keep track of things. It's also, I think, really helpful to help us iterate and refine whatever we're writing. So one of my biggest concerns with AI is that we're the ones doing the driving. The human has to be in the loop. If I don't keep my dog under control when we're taking a walk, he will walk me. He will pull me to the point where he is choking himself, and I have to force him to stay by my side. And I think this is true with AI as well. We have to treat the outputs as suggestions rather than finished ideas. And so rather than letting it decide where you go with the story, and it's easy to do that because it's so good sometimes, it's important that you are the ultimate decider. The collaboration comes when you're doing the driving and using AI to help you flesh out or solve problems rather than just blindly taking whatever it gives you.
Yeah, I like the dog walking analogy because I'm not picturing a poodle. I'm picturing like a Great Dane and it's going to try to tug you wherever it wants you to go. I feel that tension as well when I'm using AI. One of the problems is that it's over eager to please. It's trained to move things forward. And sometimes you need to pump the brakes and say, well, hey, hold on. You're kind of moving in a direction that I need to correct you and bring you back to what I have in my head. And also you need to clearly communicate those things that are in your head. Otherwise, the AI just goes wherever it wants to go. So where do we go next after we get this initial creative ideas down? Where do we go from there?
I think the next step in the process is that you can use AI tools to outline and structure your book. After you've done the work of coming up with your scenario, whatever it is you're going to write, the next step is to organize the content. And AI is really good at assisting in this process of creating outlines, story beats. I know some authors even like to use like mind maps and give a structure to their book in that way. I found that at times it'll help me create a really solid outline. And then I have to take that outline and break it down into a section at a time. I think too often people try to bite off the entire project in one prompt, but it works best when you outline and then you break that outline into pieces and sections and tackle it one at a time.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously just the output length. You can't output an entire book in one ChatGPT response. Most you're going to get is, 1,200 words-ish. Even as a human, as we're going through this process, doing that first step of having an outline that you can then iterate through is really important. We can come to the project with an idea of roughly how we want to structure, but just like anything else, we can use AI as an assistant to help in that process as well. And so either you can give it a overall direction for where you want the book to go, or you can let it do the work on the front end, and then you are the editor to make those final decisions. Particularly with nonfiction, if you're writing like a business book or something like that, then you've got a lot of source material that you're working from. Something like deep research is a really powerful research tool that you can then reorganize that into a compelling outline that you can use to go forward. But never ever take anything verbatim unless it's just like happens to be you hit the jackpot and it gives you exactly what you want. Just use it as a starting point, edit that down, rearrange, add chapters. Again, you're the driver, you're in the driver's seat. Let's get really practical, Jason. You've been through this process. You used AI to help you write your book on AI. You used it as an assistant in the process, and you were the creative one. Walk through the experience. What were some of the tools that you used in the process, like ChatGPT, Claude? Where did they fit in? Why did you use the tools that way? Let's get really practical for folks.
When I was working on AI in the church, I did use a combination of different tools. ChatGPT is sort of like my Swiss Army knife. I will pull it out and it can do a little bit of everything. I did find, though, when I was using ChatGPT, oftentimes I got a little tired of the flowery language or the fact that it would tell me the same thing 3 times, restating and stating again and that kind of thing. And then I discovered that at least at the time, Claude was so much better at creating natural language. And so I might outline something in ChatGPT and then take it over to Claude, and Claude would help me to flesh that out in language that was a little more human. I did give it samples of my own work. I did find that it would help me create first drafts that I could then take in a different direction. Every chatbot seems to have its own sort of personality. I also occasionally dabbled in Gemini, and I found Gemini to be a little over-opinionated and restrictive, and I felt like I was fighting it most of the time I was trying to write with it. So for me, that wasn't the best option, but it was a combination of all those tools together that really made it a successful project.
Yeah, it's also interesting to see how like sub-models within a model family, so going from like GPT-4 to 4 Turbo to 4.0 to even like OpenAI is constantly updating their models and providing new training and fresh material, which then can also somewhat change the tone of what comes out and what it's good at. So even if you're using GPT 4.0 today, what it was 6 months ago isn't the same model that you're using today. So you can have some differences there. We brought up GPT 4.5 earlier in the episode, and I found that it's also very, very natural in terms of the tone and the way that it produces language in a way that I haven't seen any other model to date creates content. At the end of the day, every human has its own writing style and their own tone, and every model is going to have its own writing style and tone as well. So it kind of comes down to a matter of preference, like you did, explore which one gives you what you want the best, and then go use that. But we're not locked into any one model, which is the beauty of it.
Yeah. Another really practical way that you can use these tools when you're writing a book is to use it to improve the flow of what you've written and even the prose. I find that sometimes I've got everything written that I want to say, but it just feels a little clunky. There's some hard edges on it that I need to knock off. And so it's great at rephrasing and clarity. And sometimes it'll give me something back that still feels like it's my words, but it's cleaned it up a little bit. In a narrative form, I also have found that it can suggest how a scene might unfold in a way that you haven't thought of. And so it can help you work out a tricky scene if you're having trouble with it. You might have to give it 2 or 3 drafts. We both know that you have to go through a lot of drafts when you're creating imagery. I think the same thing is true when you're creating text as well. But you might tell it like, I've got these two characters and they're in a tense scene and they're trying to find the MacGuffin in the story. And so AI might write a dialogue for that scene, and it's definitely not going to be perfect, but it's a starting place that will give you something to perfect. And I find that to be really helpful. So when I was working on my book, I would often ask whatever chatbot I was using at the time, can you please rewrite this section for clarity? Another thing that I would sometimes do is say, I need a metaphor here that would help explain this abstract concept. I like to think of it as your thesaurus, it's your brainstorming partner, it's your editor. Your voice is the consistent voice throughout. AI can go all over the place.
Yeah. And so let's talk about some ways that we can actually produce a consistent voice with an LLM or a language model while we're writing. I get the question a lot. How do you create a consistent voice when you're having AI produce content for you? It's important, obviously, because you want your stuff to sound like you. And one concern is that AI-generated text might feel different from your natural writing style. Turns out that getting AI to write in your tone is really, really, really hard. And the reason being is that models are trained to have a specific tone. So they trained and reinforced, this is how I talk. And that's why a lot of those words like, delve or let's delve into this thing, they show up in
Tapestry.
Yeah. They show up in pretty much like all of the AI-generated content. So you're never going to fully overcome the model's training. The wrong way to do it is to throw a wall of text at it and say, copy my writing style, because it can't do that. It's going to predict a response that comes out of its training and sounds like the model. And it might get a few different words, but really digging into the nuance of your style, it's not going to do just from looking at a couple snippets of text. There's two things that I would recommend to do in order to get closer to your voice coming out of AI. First thing is to distill your style into a style guide. And so for this podcast, we've got a style guide that governs how we talk about things, how we refer to the title and the theme, how we structure YouTube descriptions and social media posts. And so in a separate chat, what I do is I'll upload a substantial sample of the writing, and I'll basically ask the model to write instructions for your ghostwriter to emulate the tone and style of your writing in clear and concrete terms. But what ChatGPT doesn't need to know is that in another chat, it's going to be your ghostwriter. And so basically it's writing the instructions for itself that will capture in instruction form some of the nuance of your tone that you can then apply in other areas as well. And so kind of take what it says, review it, add some of your own directions, cover any elements that are missing or important to you. But then once you kind of get into that role, provide a few brief samples to guide the output, and then draw the model's attention to why you're giving them those specific samples. And so contrary to popular belief, like uploading hundreds of pages of your writing to a custom GPT or Claude isn't going to, quote, train it on your style. You need to eliminate those words training from your vocabulary altogether if all you're doing is uploading content, because with ChatGPT specifically, the model never has access to all of the content that's uploaded to it. Like, people don't get that. It uses this external tool to kind of summarize it or maybe find some snippets. And so if you upload like a 100-page PDF, it doesn't have access to that and it can't use it to even guide your tone. Instead, you just kind of give the model a few specific samples that represent specific elements of your tone, like how do characters dialogue? What do you mean by a friendly but authoritative tone? What does your sentence structure look like when you say, I want dynamic punctuated sentences? Then take all of that, compile those instructions into like a custom GPT and ChatGPT, or if you're using Claude, you can do a project. So that those instructions are always referenced in every new conversation about your writing. Doing those two things, using it as an assistant to create your style guide for your ghostwriter, and then saying, hey, here's the instructions, be my ghostwriter, that will help you get a lot closer to your style. And then at the end of the day, you apply your editing and discernment to the output and really craft it to sound just like you.
Part of why I love doing this podcast with you is that you blow my mind with these things, because I have seen 1,000 videos on YouTube saying, teach AI to write in your style and upload these things. And I think a lot of people are snowing people on their knowledge about what these tools can actually do. So it's interesting to hear that you can't train it on your style by just giving it dozens and dozens of your documents. So helpful stuff.
I think another thing to bring up here is to avoid becoming over-reliant on the AI in the process. And so Like, we want to use it, but we also like want to not be so reliant on it that we start to sound like it, or if we don't have it, then we can't do the work. And so like, I remember a time where we were chatting back and forth, and it's like, oh no, ChatGPT is down. And you said to me, like, I don't know how I'm going to write my book. What was that experience like for you?
Oh my gosh. It actually scared me quite a bit. There was a day that I was working on the book, went to ChatGPT. As you said, it was down. All my conversations were gone. I'm like, oh my gosh, I opened it up on my phone, discovered that it's just an outage. But I closed my laptop and I'm like, I can't write today. And then I had this thought that I've written 13 other books. I never had ChatGPT before. Am I so overly reliant on ChatGPT that I can no longer form my own thoughts? And that scared me. So I reopened the laptop and didn't use it the rest of the day. And that kind of created within me this mantra that I like to say a lot, which is embrace these tools, but restrain how you use them. If you're not careful, you become the passengers on the Axiom in the movie Wall-E, who are floating around on carts and AI is doing everything for them. And now they no longer have the ability to walk. Their muscles are so atrophied. So I do think there is a danger in becoming overly reliant on these tools. They're great to partner with, but they can't do everything for us.
Yeah. So Jason, I feel like that's a really good spot to take a break. Let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about things like editing and how to use AI in the promotional process. So we'll be right back with you.
Today's episode is brought to you by the publisher of my book, AI in the Church. Invite Press is a publishing imprint of Invite Ministries, dedicated to helping people live more like Jesus. Invite Press works with theological thought leaders to create practical tools for daily faith. Their mission is rooted in a commitment to God's grace, our choice, and the invitation to a life of holiness. With a wide range of printed and digital resources, Invite Press offers something for everyone, whether you're diving into scripture, leading a small group, or simply seeking to grow in your faith. Their creators are humble leaders passionate about spreading the joy of Christ. Invite Press aims to be a trusted destination for faith traditions that emphasize grace and transformation. If you're looking for resources to strengthen your faith journey, visit inviteministries.org and browse their inspiring collection.
All right, Jason. So we have a draft. We've got, kind of the starting point done. We've used AI in the brainstorming process. We've used our human brain to kind of bang out some content on a keyboard. We've consulted with AI in the process to get us to a point where we've got like a draft manuscript. Where do we go from here?
I'll tell you that I have to edit almost every one of my social media posts. I am very reliant on editors when I've written books in the past. And so that is the next step, is that we have to go through and do some editing. And there are AI-based editing tools that can catch grammar mistakes, give you style suggestion improvements, and even analyze your readability. Now, I do find half the time I don't agree with the suggestions that it's making, but even though they have limitations, they can be helpful. I still think a human editor is really helpful. While I was writing my AI in the church book, Grammarly was my best friend, and I'm sure my editor appreciated that the draft was a lot cleaner. But I still think having that human editor makes an enormous difference. Checkers like Grammarly or Copilot have been around for a while, and they do a pretty good job. They'll scan your text for issues in seconds. They'll highlight things like spelling errors, punctuation, even awkward phrasing. I think of them as like the first line of defense when I'm writing, but you can also ask your chatbot to look over your text and fix grammar issues. I still find that sometimes, though, it gets it wrong. I remember throughout the book, you kept telling me when you saw the early versions of the book that I kept writing in passive tense instead of active tense. And AI wouldn't do that for me, and it didn't catch it. So it's having a human in the loop is a really helpful thing.
Yeah, AI editors have their place, and you also need to put them in their place and put them in their proper place. So, thinking through my experience collaborating with you on AI in the church, I think there's some principles that we can follow to use AI editors effectively. Like you said, they're your first line of defense, so they'll help you catch the big stuff before you send it off to your editor for a real first pass. It should catch the obvious stuff, so things like typos, subject-verb disagreements, misplaced commas, etc. And it'll make it easier to focus on those higher level edits. But like you said, to take our point from earlier where AI is trained in a specific way to write in a specific way, it might not write like you. And so therefore, some of the decisions that you intentionally make, the AI might say, this is wrong. And I will look back at the AI and say, you're wrong. It's my book. So I'm going to write it how I want to write it. So you don't just take those suggested changes blindly. So if like you're doing the editing, you just don't hit the accept button every time. You got to think through each piece and make sure that it's fit in the broader context of your work. AI doesn't get the context or the nuance that goes into the decisions that you made. It's only looking at a snippet of text at one time. And so it's not necessarily looking at the whole of the work and making sure that it's uniform. So it might mark perfectly fine sentences as errors or offer like a synonym that it thinks you mean one thing and you mean something different and just totally change your meaning. Grammarly might suggest replacing a word with something that it thinks might be more concise, but that new word doesn't fit your voice or the tone of what you're trying to write. So use your judgment there for each change.
So what all this boils down to is we need to recognize that there are limitations and strengths. AI is good at catching some of those mechanical errors, but it's not going to be able to assess narrative logic, emotional impact, creative style like a human editor will, because again, it has no human experience. AI is not going to recognize that the foreshadowing that you were setting up in chapter 2 never paid off later in the book if you didn't ever get to it. Those are developmental issues beyond its scope. So you need humans still in the mix. Humans are much better at looking at those kind of things, offering those kind of critiques to the writing that you're doing.
So Jason, I think one other area, we've already talked about using AI in the brainstorming process and outlining process, but one unique use case is in things like research and fact checking, because no matter what you're writing a book requires research, whether that's nonfiction, whether it's fiction, etc. Things like historical facts, in your book where you're talking about the history of AI, or if you're doing narrative, establishing like an accurate world for a period piece and understanding what the world looked like at that time. Things like scientific details, if you're writing science fiction, making sure a fictional world has internal consistency. And so making sure that all the pieces line up and they make sense together. Some of the greatest works of art are things like the Harry Potter series, which has like this pages and pages and pages and words and words and words of character building that all just line up. And so we can use AI tools in the process here. We can use them as a assistant, but again, we have to be the ones with the human brain. Not a book, but I was developing a video game a couple of years ago as kind of my entry into the world of game development, which was never finished. But I used ChatGPT in the process to help with world building, reference historical details. It was like a period piece set in 1980s rural farming community in China. And I'd never been there, but I learned so much about that part of the world and how culture worked in that part of the world, how the cultural context of what China was like in the early 80s, just from using AI as a starting point for all of that research. And it really helps create this consistent narrative. So AI can help with that information gathering. It can help with fact checking, but you need to be very careful to avoid inaccuracies and hallucinations, because we both have run into that as we've been producing our work too. As I approach research, I want to follow a couple principles. First, you can use AI to kind of get some background information real quick. My game narrative was set in a rural farming village in 1980s China. I read a ton of books about the historical context, the culture, but I got to engage and apply with all that research with ChatGPT, bringing it in and then interacting with that information. I can ask questions, I can dig in, I can explore ideas, apply those ideas to my specific narrative. For factual things, you can use AI-driven search engines, Bing's AI Chat or Perplexity, that can answer factual questions with cited sources. Basically, they're taking a search engine, combining it with a chatbot. You ask a question, it reviews some sources and gives you some references. I find that Perplexity, for example, can still hallucinate even when it's using search. If you are using ChatGPT's search feature, it can still make things up when it's using search. And sometimes even those references don't align with what the actual source material said. So don't let it give you that false sense of security. They can still make things up. And sometimes I find they actually hallucinate worse when they are relying on search. Because I guess, I don't know, maybe the model's a little overconfident and they're like, I found this in the source material. I'm like, no, you completely made that up. It is the internet after all. And so particularly when there's things like current events after the model's knowledge cut off, it has no internal sense of whether it's right or wrong. It's just going to repeat it and it may or may not be correct. But now we both have used this tool for this very purpose in this planning our podcast. We've got Deep Research, which is a new tool out of OpenAI built into ChatGPT that is a mind-blowing tool when it comes to getting you a wealth of information about a topic you're writing about. Google, ChatGPT, Perplexity, they all have their versions of this, but basically what you do is you say, hey, I want to learn about this, and here's the kind of some of the parameters that I want to learn about. For example, for our next episode, we're going to be talking about, is AI going to take my job as a creative? And I wanted to find references for what people have said about this topic. I wanted to find anecdotes about people who have been impacted by AI in their creative roles. And I gave it those initial parameters. It asked me some questions to clarify because it's about to do 15 minutes of work and look at a bunch of different sources. So it wants to get it right. And then it goes and scours the internet for resources to help solve that specific problem. So it's not just like one basic search that turns up a few links and says, here you go, good luck. It's crawling 20, 30, 40. I've had up to 80 references crawled with deep research. It'll take either 5, 10, up to 15 minutes to compile all of this. And then it just spits out this long report that synthesizes everything that is covered. It's basically like having a professional research assistant as opposed to having an intern doing some basic research for you. So it's pretty incredible. If you're going to use a tool for research, that's the one to go to currently.
My AI book took me about 6 months to write. I was moving as fast as I could, and at times I was doing all sorts of research. I can only imagine what deep research could have done for me in time savings. And so it's pretty cool. You can use it also to summarize material. So let's say you wanted to learn about medieval sword fighting techniques. You could have it write a 20-page paper on that from a deep research query. So this is particularly helpful for when you need to digest complex materials and translate it. And then it will even adapt it into prose that will work for readers. One problem I did run into sometimes is that AI would give me summaries that weren't accurate. Sometimes it would hallucinate, or it would pull in information that it made up. And I had this happen a lot with ChatGPT. It would even make up references. I'd have to go check those references. You remember Ronald Reagan had a very well-known phrase that he would say all the time. It wasn't his, but he said it a lot, which was trust but verify. You generally can trust this stuff, but you do need to verify because, as we said, it does make some things up.
That reminds me of the example of the lawyer who used ChatGPT to write their legal brief, and it made up a bunch of different cases that didn't exist. And I don't know if they got disbarred or what, but the outcome was not good. So the trust but verify principle is really important. Let's wrap up this section on research by recapping a few principles. One, we already talked about trust but verify. Use your human brain. So if something seems off, it probably is. Never take anything of consequence that comes out of a chatbot as fact until you have independently confirmed that. So do your own research, verify as well, but use it as a starting point. Use AI as that first pass to gather the facts, and then you can take those candidate facts and apply them to broader understanding. Take everything that you've learned, synthesize it, run it through your experience, context, your objective, your BS detector, put all of that to work because, again, these are tools. These aren't end-all, be-all solutions. And then finally, cite resources in your research. Just like those lawyers who wrote a legal brief and they made up cases that didn't exist, they never bothered to check them. Go back and check those sources. Even ask it like, hey, can you give me a reference for that? Remember that if you're just chatting with an LLM, it doesn't know where it got information from, just like you might not remember where you learned a particular piece of information from. It's not like pulling it out of a card catalog in a library. I just dated myself with that illustration. It's not going to give you a specific place where it found that most of the time. So you might need to do a little bit of extra research, ask it to cite sources, and then double check, triple check those sources as well. And then finally, some of these research tools like deep research, like the search tool, will provide some footnote citations. Again, it helps you verify, but it's just because the citation is there doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate.
I will tell you that when I was writing the book, one of my favorite things was to let AI write my citations for me. I would give it all the information and then it knew how to do all the proper formatting. And my publisher loved that because they had to reformat so many of my citations in my previous book. So that was after I verified everything, but so helpful. I love it.
Indeed. And then the last thing to be aware of when you're dealing with these models, I mentioned earlier, but it's worth mentioning again, be aware of the knowledge cutoff of these models. And so every model has a knowledge cutoff, which represents the end point of the information on which it was trained. Intrinsic to the model, it can't know anything that has come after that knowledge cutoff. Pretend that you went into a coma in October of 2023, which is the knowledge cutoff currently for GPT-4o, and you woke up today and somebody asked you about the events of the past 2 years, and all you can do is you can look at the front page of Google once to come up with your entire worldview of what has happened in the past 2 years. That's what the LLM is doing. And so anything that you've asked about current events, filter through that, because chances are, even if it searches, it's going to completely make things up and you will need to do some extra work there. So knowledge cutoff, important. Remember that. Most models currently are in the late 2023 timeframe, and they keep getting added to, but they will never be fully current. Be aware of that.
We've always run into that question about who won the Super Bowl and it doesn't know. So just know that those are questions that it doesn't have answers to. I think the last thing here just to remember is that when you're writing fiction, it's a good idea to verify that the information that you're including in your story is accurate. There's nothing worse than having a glaring error in your story that would throw somebody off and really invalidate everything that you wrote.
Yeah, and remember too that these models are trained on fiction as well, in part. If one of those details ends up in its worldview of what existed at the time, it's going to tell you that, and it's going to be very confident, and it's going to be wrong. So Jason, let's talk about the finishing touches. We've got our book, it's written, it's ready to go. How do we get this thing out the door and use AI in the process of promoting our book?
So there are AI tools out there that will automatically format your book. It's really important that your book is formatted in a professional way for an ebook or even a print book. Do some web searching. You'll find there are some resources out there to help you with that. Cover design is also extremely important. I spent a lot of time working on the cover for my AI in the church book. I found that Ideogram was the best resource for this for me, but there are tools like Midjourney, Flux, and if you are working more on the illustration, you don't have to worry so much about the text. But if you're working on incorporating text into your cover, I would highly recommend you check out Ideogram for doing that. I have found that these tools will only get you about 60% of the way there. So you're still going to have to do that human touch element where you're going to bring a lot of yourself to it and make it more appealing than AI will on its own.
Yeah, and just like any of the other stages in the process too, it's great for brainstorming and just that previs stage, look dev, what other buzzwords can I fit in there? I want to get some ideas and I want to explore some concepts. Even if you don't use AI for the final product for your design, you can use it in that stage of the process. A couple other areas where AI really fits into the promotional process that comes after you've published the book is all of those marketing assets that you're going to need in order to get the book out there and get it published. Things like writing your blurbs, things like writing metadata. If it were me publishing a brand new book, and if you're in the situation as well, listener, I would take a custom GPT or something similar, like a project in Claude, and I would load up all of the information in your book and then use that as a go-to for generating all of these assets out of it. Things like getting that blurb written, things like choosing keywords that you're going to use in website or Amazon. If you're working from a core place of truth, you don't have to keep telling the model all of the details about your book. You just go back and say, all right, hey, you know about the book. Let's do this task now. And then once you get to that post-publishing process and the promotional process, there's a bunch more assets that you need to create to promote the book. And so, for example, Jason, I know in the past when we talked about your book on this podcast, we played your trailer ahead of time. What are some of the tools that you've used in that promotional process where AI has helped you create that cool stuff that you're going to use to support that marketing process?
I'll put a plug in for our earlier episode where we talked about our favorite tools because we covered a lot of these. 11 Labs is great for voiceover work. So if you want to embody your book in a trailer and have some of the things that you're talking about spoken, you've got that. We both love Suno and Udio to generate music. Runway ML does incredible things with still imagery to bring those things to life. This isn't something everyone's going to do, but I do think a book trailer can really help you attract people to your concept and get them to want to crack that book open or to place an order for their digital copy.
Even like all the little marketing assets that need to go into the drudgery that as a writer, I just wrote a book. I don't want to write all of my social media posts too. You can use AI to repurpose your content, and that's really where it excels. You're going to be the creative driver for your book itself, but AI can synthesize and summarize and repurpose content like a pro. And so use AI to write the website copy, use it to write your social media posts, take your manuscript, throw it in section by section and say, give me 10 social media posts for this. You've got 500 social media posts in an hour. So use the tools that are available for you, use them within the context of what they're meant to do, and use them for your strengths. And you're going to find that your process of becoming an author is going to be far smoother than if you were not using these tools. That's my takeaway from this whole episode, Jason, is that there are tools that we can use to make the process easier. It doesn't have to be so overwhelming and daunting. I might go write a book after this. Like by the time we have our next episode, I'm going to have a book published, man.
You know, I think we both should just go write the great American novel and then retire on some beachfront property somewhere. So what do we have coming up next time, Rob? What are we going to talk about in our next episode?
Yeah, so next time we've got, I think, really important conversation. You know, we've been in a lot of how-to during our first episodes here of this podcast, and we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, get a little philosophical and get a little bit of social commentary, because one question that I've seen come up a lot is AI going to take my job as a creative? And I think that's something worth exploring. So we're going to explore that next time. So that's all we got time for today. This has been a whopper of an episode. I hope that you'll join us on the next episode of Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast, and we look forward to engaging with you offline during the week.
Thanks for tuning in to Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, it would mean a lot to us if you'd smash that subscribe button, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend. If you'd like to connect with us or follow along on the projects we're working on, find us on Instagram at AI Creative Podcast or AICreativePodcast.com.